Thanks for sticking with us so far in this folder on 19th century science and society. In this particular chapter of our class, we're looking at the development of some very complex, impressive science in both chemistry and biology happening in the 19th century in Europe, and the response to that by religion, by organized Christianity, both the Protestants and the Catholics in Western Europe, right? That's where we're headed. And so this video is meant to just sort of wrap up some of the main points that the other videos attempted to drive home. As you know, with the advent of Darwin and his theory of evolution, we have, for the first time in European history, the first time in European thought, a challenge to the idea that there was no single creation, that there was no single creation of all species. There was no single creation of the earth, the plants, the animals, and then humans sort of all at once, such that people thought for the longest time that all the species of plants and animals that ever were, that had ever been created, are still here today, right? And that they were all created at the same time. And this is earth-shattering to think that the scientists are finding in the 19th century fossils from things like dinosaurs, from mastodons, great giant animals that used to live and walk the earth but don't anymore, right? So what other species are not here anymore? This whole idea of species extinction, whether it's plants or insects or animals, had never been entertained. And so suddenly you've got this idea that the earth is far older than we ever imagined, that some animals and plants no longer exist, but might have been part of God's creation, and they're gone now. How could this be? So you throw Darwin in there with not only Darwin and his work, but certainly work on geology, right? Work on things like climate is starting to happen in the 19th century, looking for patterns in climate. And the idea that the earth is far older than we could even imagine, right? People of the day, of Darwin's day, and some people still today, held the idea that the earth was created somewhere in the 4000s BC and was no more than 5,000 years old, 6,000 years old, right? And the idea that it's not only much older than that, right? It's not only that it's thousands of years older, but that it's hundreds of thousands of years older, that it's millions of years older. And this was just inconceivable. This was too much to handle for a lot of people. It is truly revolutionary in thought. It's revolutionary in science. And much like Copernicus had changed the place of the earth in the universe, now we're changing the nature of the earth. The natural world is far more complex than we ever imagined. What about the religious response to this? It's one thing to think about the change in the location of the earth, I suppose. It's probably another to think about all the work that had been gone into trying to date the creation of the earth, and now that's all upside down. We find both religious response in the Protestant world as well as the Catholic world. Remember that the Protestant Reformation was somehow born of the Renaissance, just as the scientific revolution was born of the Renaissance in many ways, right? And so your books will tell you, your McClellan and Dorn, the videos we presented, will argue that the Reformation thinkers derived a lot of support from scientists and their challenges to Greek authority, right? Reformation writers and thinkers will challenge Catholic authority, and they will use their own analysis of Scripture in order to do this, right? So we're going to see some connections there. Now, the people such as John Calvin and Martin Luther don't believe that Copernicus knows what he's talking about either. So they will challenge Copernicus himself, but they live in a time of challenging preconceived notions, and so they do seem to find some kind of kindred spirit, if you will, with the scientific revolution. From the Catholic perspective, I think this scientific revolution was much more jarring, if you will. Remember that the church is over 2,000 years old, right? At least in our day, it certainly is. And in that day, almost 2,000 years old. We're in the 19th century. And the church used to understand the world of Europe as one of unity. Unity in religion, unity in political leadership, a connection between the leadership of Europe and the leadership of the church had always been something one could rely upon, right? A certain cultural unity in the world, right? Now there may be different languages spoken all across Europe, but there was a certain sort of predictability in European society when it came to education, when it came to trying to deal with social concerns, right? That political leaders and church leaders worked hand in hand to resolve that. Think, for example, about Germany, where it was very common for the state, such as it was, to rely upon the church to deliver education, to deliver health care even in Germany prior to the Kulturkampf of the 19th century. So when we move into the 19th century for the church, the Catholic Church, this unity is disappearing. In fact, it may be disappeared altogether. It's disappearing with the rise of the nation state and this concept of the separation of church and state, right? That is the cultural background to the 19th century. So you've got, not only has the earth moved from its place of primacy, which the church has dealt with by the time we get to the 19th century. If you will recall, the church had seen earlier that Copernicanism was a heresy if taught as a fact. If taught as a theory, okay, that was all right. But if it's taught as a fact, that's going too far. The Galileo had transgressed this idea. By the time we get to the 19th century, both the works of Galileo and Copernicus are made available to the Catholic faithful. No longer are they on the index of banned books. So the church has dealt with that, if you will, has dealt with Copernicanism, has seen what science has been able to prove, if you will, by the time we get to the 19th century. The Enlightenment, on the other hand, this idea of working on the human condition from a scientific perspective, social science, the science of economics, political science, even corrections and education, right? This idea that we can use social science to derive the best good for the human condition, and that we're going to use reason and rationale. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, social scientists rejected theological authority in trying to derive the greater good for the human condition. And this is most disturbing, I would suggest, to the church, that with the Enlightenment, just as with Copernicus, we had moved the earth from its place of primacy in creation, with the Enlightenment, we're going to remove religion and religious authority and tradition from its place of primacy with regard to the human condition, right? And this is one of the primary mission items of the church, is to support the human condition, to lead the human condition ethically, morally, socially, even culturally. Yeah. So the 19th century, a time of great change in science and technology. You already know this. Science and technology has moved very quickly, very fast. The same with organized religion, both in Protestant communities and in Catholic communities. There's been an awful lot to deal with in the that science has brought us. Again, whether it is the science of astronomy, the science of biology and chemistry, and now social science. You'll remember from our discussion that when we move into the 20th century, that the church will come to understand the role of evolution in human history and offer its own response. The church will come to understand that Galileo was not guilty of a heresy, and publish that. Now you may think it's a little bit late, but okay. Still, they come around to that. We now have a Pope in the 21st century, Pope Francis, who works on ideas of climate and the environment. He's a biochemist. So we have a Pope who's a biochemist. When I see that, I think, wow, this is a big change from the 19th century. This is a big change. Yet, I would suggest that both science and religion move sometimes methodically towards seemingly rather similar ends. Both are after truth. Both aim to understand, to acquire knowledge. Both aim to support the human condition. So, off we go to the 20th and the 21st century.